So from now on, unless anything changes, of course, I'm gonna start talking about the GPU shortage like it's actually starting to ease up and things are getting easier and easier. Graphics cards are indeed getting easier to buy right now, and it's finally allowing me to create videos like this, where this is just a very repeatable and easy build guide again. I'm super excited. Let's check this thing out. So yeah, like I was saying in the intro, with the GPU shortage starting to ease up a bit, I'm super excited that I can finally make videos like this again. The graphics card that's in here, along with everything else, is actually pretty easy to find right now at a good price, and although there's definitely still room for our price to performance numbers to increase as 2022 progresses, for $1,000, this is about the best you can do without relying on finding a super crazy deal or anything. And speaking of super crazy deals, let's take a quick break for the sponsor of today's video. Real quickly, I just wanted to remind you guys that today's build was indeed activated with Windows like all my other PC builds and flips, and I personally use GVG Mall, which is also the sponsor of today's video. Right now, they're actually increasing our normal 18% discount all the way up to 25% off, so you can get a legit Windows 10 activated version without that nasty watermark for a really cheap price. They also have other great products on other software like Office 2021, and even some game keys from platforms like Steam, Origin, and Uplay, and they even have console stuff too, like PSN and Xbox prepaid cards as well. Activating that Windows 10 on your computer is super simple to do. The entire process of buying and activating takes like 5 minutes total, so make sure you click that first link down in the description, and don't forget to use discount code ZTT18 for 25% off. Alright, so starting off with the first part, the CPU, of course, we're definitely going to need a disclaimer here, so buckle up. This here is the Intel i5-10400, and although it's indeed 2 generations out of date now, it's still a super high-performing bang-for-your-buck CPU coming in at less than $150. I paid $127, and it's packing 6 cores and 12 threads with a nice turbo clock of up to 4.3 gigahertz. Now, mine here is actually the 10400, like I said, not the 10400F, but if you're using a dedicated graphics card, then you can definitely just go with the F version that doesn't have integrated graphics. But honestly, just be aware that sometimes, for whatever reason, the 10400 is actually cheaper than the 10400F, so definitely just go with whichever one has the lowest price tag. The other disclaimer, and definitely more important one, is that I want to quickly explain why this $1,000 build guide is rocking a 2-generation-old CPU. I think the explanation is definitely warranted.
Let me explain.
First off, it's hard to imagine that the 10400 is already 2 generations old at this point. It's still just such a meta option in my mind, and I'm using it in a ton of my build guides still, but this is important to note that even though the GPU shortage is indeed easing up a little bit, this is a lagging effect because in order to afford these GPUs, we still have to cut a little bit of costs in other things like the CPU. Before the shortage, a $1,000 system was actually somewhat higher end, or at least the high end of the mid-range builds, and that usually involved either the latest generation of CPU or maybe 1 generation old, but because we have to spend a higher percentage of our build on the graphics card still, other areas are gonna have to suffer as a result of that. And when I say suffer, I mean you're just not gonna get the absolute latest and greatest. This 10400 isn't going to remotely bottleneck our graphics card today, and it's still plenty fast enough. But it is worth noting that we aren't on the latest 12th gen platform with the ability to have DDR5 memory, PCIe Gen 4, E cores and P cores and stuff like that. Hopefully that all made sense, but we got to move on to the motherboard, and this is a pretty budget value option, being the ASRock B560 Pro 4, which cost me around $123. Honestly, this is simply one of the most budget B560 boards that kind of fits our color scheme, and I didn't select this for any specific features, but it'll work perfectly fine for our build today. As a side note, you would indeed have the option to upgrade to an 11th gen Intel CPU with this motherboard if you wanted to, but most people probably aren't going to do that. What most people should do, however, is take advantage of the constant RAM deals that Dr. Deals posts in our Discord server, discord.gg/ZTT by the way, and one of the deals he posted was this Crucial Ballistics 2x8GB kit that's clocked at 3200 MHz and rocking some clean AF RGB. We're also all about the SSD deals in the server, and one of the most meta options whenever it goes on sale is the Crucial P5 500GB NVMe drive, and this is a staple of the channel at this point. Do note that whenever this SSD is not on a sale, it's actually not at a great price unless you see it around the $55, which is what I paid, or even the $44, which is what I paid for a few of them a little while ago. I would steer clear of this one. Just go with any 500GB Gen 3 NVMe drive with DRAM that costs around $50 to $60 and you'll be perfectly fine. You should also spend about that same amount of money on your power supply for a build like this, and I actually got a crazy deal during Black Friday for the Super Flower LED X3650 Bronze, and it only cost me $25, but that's obviously not repeatable right now. Use the PSU tier list that you can find in our Discord server or just by searching it on Google, and for a $1,000 build, you really shouldn't go with anything less than a tier B power supply. Make sure it's 80 plus bronze or 80 plus gold certified, and if you're worried about space, then feel free to splurge on a modular design, but that's obviously not a requirement. And speaking of which, the case we're using didn't have any cable management issues, and this is the Deepcool CK560 white, and shout out to Deepcool for sending this one over. I actually already used the black version of this case in one of our GPU benchmarking videos, so check that one out if you haven't already, but I really like the looks of this case. It is a tad bit on the expensive end, so if you're spending this kind of money on a case, make sure that you get one that you personally like, but this CK560WH comes with 3 RGB fans in the front with 1 black fan in the rear. It's got a nice and unique airflow design front panel, a full clean and black PSU shroud, and honestly, I really like it because it's just wide open and you have so many options on what you can do inside of it. Deepcool's website shows you exactly what type of fan and or radiator config that you can go with, which is pretty useful, and it's rocking all the IO that you need up top with 2 USB type A's, audio combo, and even a USB-C port, which you love to see. But do keep in mind that if you get a budget motherboard option like we did, you don't have the ability to use that USB-C port. You'll have to spend a bit extra money on the motherboard that has one of those if that's something that you need. And for our last core performance part of the build, we have the graphics card, and you may have picked up on this already, but this is the MSI Mech RX 6600 2X, and it's very important to note that although this one looks clean AF, and this is the one I recommend, you can go with whichever RX 6600 that you want to, because they're really getting easier and easier to find right now. I personally picked this one up for $460 on Newegg, and honestly, even that price looks kind of ridiculous at this point because in the past month or so, the prices of these continues to lower and lower, and it's just not that hard to grab these for the low $400 mark right now, especially if you're in a Discord community like ours where we send out notifications when these go in stock. Here's a screenshot of not just the 6600, but a 6600 XT going on sale on Best Buy just a couple of days ago for $430. I picked one of these up, by the way, and these GPUs just aren't that hard to find right now. I hope you don't take all of this GPU talk the wrong way, but just for some real talk and real love real quick, if you've been struggling to find a $400 to $500 GPU in the last 2 to 3 months, you're either not actually trying that hard or you're not looking in the correct spots, because our community members have been buying these left and right on places like Newegg, and in today's market, they're actually packing some very decent value. We'll benchmark the system in just a second so you can see what I'm talking about, but I do want to remind everybody that everything I ever say about the market, the shortage, pricing, or anything like that is only ever from the perspective of somebody that lives in the United States. I'm 100% aware that other countries other than the United States have far less stock than we did, and I 100% have sympathy for those people, and I legitimately have zero clue how hard it is to get a graphics card in those countries. Everything that I ever say is only talking about the United States. And before we get to the benchmarking section, we have a couple of more parts to wrap up here. Of course, we're using some all-white Asia Horse extensions that I picked up for $16 on sale. And finally, huge shout out to Arctic for overnighting some cooling products that we needed in the upper left-hand corner of our build today. Because the Deepcool CK560 only came with that black fan in the rear, which is very typical for cases these days, I decided that we needed to continue our color scheme up there. So this is the Arctic Bionics 120 white and black fan, and we also threw 2 of them up at the top as well for some better airflow and of course aesthetics. These fans match perfectly with our Arctic Freezer 34 Esports Duo, and both of these in combination just really ties our white and black aesthetic perfectly, and I'm really excited about it. Gamers Nexus actually recently released, as per usual, a super in-depth review of this cooler, and he definitely recommends it, so we have the blessing from Tech Jesus to continue using one of my favorite options on the market right now. So with that being said, here's what our final parts list is looking like, and as always, these individual prices are going to come down to what deals you can snipe better or worse than I did, but no matter what, here in the United States, this is what a typical $1,000 gaming PC should look like, at least one that has pretty good aesthetics. You might not be able to find as good of a price on the CPU and power supply like I did, but there's certainly potential to outsnipe me on the GPU because like I said, those prices are still going down, and you could definitely do better on the motherboard and SSD that I got as well. I should probably also start a disclaimer in my videos that this is what a build guide should look like if you rock that aesthetics over everything mindset. Obviously, if you don't buy cable extensions, Arctic cooling products, or RGB RAM and stuff like that, you could definitely squeeze a little bit better performance out of our price, and you probably could get an RX 6600 XT in a build if you do that. But moving away from the aesthetics, we're finally going to talk about performance, and per usual, Sam whipped up a huge benchmarking run for you guys, and here are the results. Starting with Fortnite per usual, we put the settings at 1080p Pro like we always do and got a solid FPS score of 146. Gonna knock out these easier to run titles first, so next up was Valorant, and in 1080p with high settings, we got exactly 200 frames per second. CSGO followed up after that, and to really see what the 10400 is capable of, and in 1080p with Pro settings, we got an obnoxious 298 FPS average. And for the last easier to run esport title, we have Rainbow Six Siege, prestige, and when using the built-in benchmarking tool in 1080p with ultra settings, we got 292 FPS. All right, so jumping into the harder to run games, we'll start with Grand Theft Auto 5, and honestly, that was also no match for this PC either, as in 1080p with high settings, we still got 132. Far Cry 6 followed up after that, and when using the built-in benchmarking tool like normal in 1080p with ultra settings, we actually still got 95 FPS, which you'd love to see. Halo Infinite trailed after that, and with 1080p and high settings, we got 91 FPS. Obviously, if you're favoring closer to that 144 FPS mark, you could drop these down to like medium and low settings to satisfy your higher refresh rate monitors. Same thing with Call of Duty Vanguard, as in 1080p with high settings, we got 105 FPS, and there's certainly room to tweak that for higher FPS, but if you're on a 60Hz monitor, you could even boost these graphics up a bit as you have some room to play with. And for the last gaming benchmark we have footage for, we have Forza Horizon 5's built-in benchmarking tool, and in 1080p with ultra settings, we got 80 frames per second. And just like always, here's a 3D Mark Time Spy run, and this $1,000 gaming PC scored 8,001, which is honestly very high for a build of this price, and definitely rocking some solid price to performance. And if you weren't watching those temperatures in the upper left-hand corner, neither the CPU or the GPU ever really got above 55 degrees Celsius, so this is obviously a very solid cooling solution, especially for these more mid-range style of parts. And for those of you that just want to see even more benchmarks, specifically with mostly the AAA titles, Sam the benchmarking god has you covered once again on that. Here's the results we got for those, and as you can see, these are all at 1080p high, very high, or ultra settings. This 10400 and 6600 combo is honestly a pretty slept on combo, especially during the GPU shortage, and if you're looking for a super easy and repeatable combo to buy right now, this is definitely the choice for you. And just like always, if you want to purchase this build, it's going to be on my next website drop at zackstechdrive.com on March 1st, and if you want absolutely nothing to do with a $1,000 system anymore, then feel free to click the video that's on the screen now if you want to see a cheaper way to build a gaming PC here in 2022. But just like always, I hope you enjoyed this video.